9 bloodied shoes hung in a gallery, sold as art. But one woman froze. She recognized a pair from a girl who vanished 22 years ago. What happened next will haunt you. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The loft was a cathedral of curated grief masquerading as innovation. Soft jazz hummed from hidden speakers, mingling with the clink of wine glasses and murmurs of reverence. Skylights spilled sterile white light over concrete floors, illuminating chrome pedestals and raw canvas hung like butcher's cloth. But none of it commanded the room, not like that installation. In the center, under a surgical array of downlights, hung the shoes. 9 pairs, blood-slicked and cracked with time, leather warped, soles partially rotted. Yet they gleamed under layers of high-gloss lacquer, as if the artist had attempted to preserve their agony in amber. They hovered in the air, each supported by near-invisible filament, forming a slow spiral that tapered toward the ceiling. The arrangement was clinical, deliberate in its detachment, like evidence, like a morgue drawer. The nameplate beside the installation read, "Footsteps of the Forgotten. Mixed media. Found objects. Private sale. $42,000. Phones rose. Gallery goers whispered. Some wept. A woman gasped, her voice trembling. "It's so provocative." A man beside her nodded solemnly, sipping from a stemmed glass of burgundy. "Haunting," he said, like he meant it. At the far edge of the crowd, Mallory Kent stood motionless, untouched by the performance of empathy around her. Her coat was still zipped, her badge tucked into the inner pocket, her hair damp from a late spring rain. The glass of wine someone had handed her moments earlier dangled in her fingers, forgotten. Her eyes locked on the 3rd shoe in the 2nd ring, pink canvas, frayed at the tongue, the left sole worn flat at the heel. A tiny daisy stitched into the side had faded to a rust-colored smear, likely soaked in blood. Mallory didn't need a DNA swab or a court order. Jenny Marr had worn those shoes the day she disappeared. Mallory had bought them for her. She stepped forward slowly, her breath sharpening into ice. The sounds of the room receded, as if she were underwater. 22 years collapsed in an instant, memory folding time like paper. She saw Jenny's smile again, the quick hug before rehearsal, the offhanded, "Be careful," she'd thrown over her shoulder. And now, her shoes, lacquered and leering, were selling as commentary. Mallory didn't blink when the sale went through. She didn't speak when the gallerist congratulated the anonymous buyer. She simply turned and walked toward the exit, heart hammering, eyes fixed forward. Because the past hadn't just returned, it had never left. DeKalb, Illinois, wasn't built to hold secrets. A flatland town stitched together by railroad tracks and modest churches, it was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew the name of their pharmacist's dog. In 2003, it had a population just shy of 40,000, and a crime rate that barely registered beyond the occasional stolen bicycle or bar fight. Then the first girl disappeared. Her name was Megan Fry, 16, a junior. She walked home from choir practice one April evening and was never seen again. At first it was denial. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she had a secret boyfriend. But by the time girl number 2 vanished, Eliza Crawford, 15, straight-A student, gone without a trace while walking 3 blocks from her friend's house, DeKalb began to shiver. By the end of that summer, 9 girls between the ages of 14 and 17 had vanished. No witnesses, no tire marks, no screams, no ransom notes. All within 12 square blocks, all students of Lincoln High, all gone without a sound. Jenny Mayer was the 5th. Her disappearance punched a hole through Mallory Kent's world. At 24, Mallory had been on the force for less than a year, still learning radio codes and how to keep her voice steady when writing tickets. Jenny was her mother's niece, but to Mallory, she was more like a little sister. Sweet, sarcastic, allergic to cats, and always scribbling poetry in the margins of her notebooks. The night Jenny vanished was the final dress rehearsal for the school's spring production of Our Town. Mallory had stopped by in uniform to say good luck. Jenny had hugged her tight, whispered that someone had been watching her again. Same black car, same spot across from the school, same cold eyes behind the windshield. Mallory had brushed it off as pre-show nerves. She would regret that until the day she died. After Jenny disappeared, Mallory wasn't allowed near the investigation. Conflict of interest, they said. She watched as out-of-town FBI agents walked circles around her family's pain, issuing press conferences and composite sketches that went nowhere. One by one, each lead evaporated into smoke. Within a year, the task force dissolved. National headlines moved on. DeKalb sealed its wound and tried to forget, even as empty chairs stayed empty. But Mallory never forgot. She buried it instead, in case files, long shifts, whiskey, and the ritual of pretending she could still serve a town that had let its daughters vanish into air. Mallory didn't wait for permission. She stormed through the gallery's back offices like someone tearing open a coffin, each door, each nameplate, a reminder that art had become a veil for something far uglier. She flashed her badge once, but mostly she let her tone do the work. Sharp, cold, intolerant of delay. In under an hour, she had what she needed. A transfer document signed by A. Bishop, listing the blood-stained shoes as found object donations, provenance unverified. A note scribbled in the margin read, "Acquired from storage unit number 11127, Red Hook, paid cash." That was her crack in the glass. The unit had gone to auction just 2 weeks prior. The buyer used the same alias, A. Bishop, but had left no phone number, just a P.O. box and a signature that reeked of performance. The auction house clerk, a nervous man with nicotine fingers, remembered the lot well. "Creepy stuff," he said. "Like someone was collecting ghosts." Mallory showed him her credentials and pressed harder. Within an hour, she had keys and an address. Unit 1127 sat at the back of a gated facility in Red Hook, rust creeping up the seams of its roll-top door like ivy. The metal groaned as she pulled it open. The smell hit her first. Dust, mildew, faint iron. Inside, the space was organized with eerie precision. 4 rusted school lockers stood along the wall, their doors removed and set aside like open mouths. Clothing racks displayed uniforms, school sweaters, denim jackets, faded backpacks with broken zippers. Beneath a tarp, she found crates stacked like archives. The first crate she opened contained nothing but sealed plastic bags. Each one held a scoop of earth. Dirt, pebbles, sometimes dried leaves. Every bag was labeled in black marker. 2003, JM, 2003, EC, 2003, MF. The initials matched the victims, her victims. Her hand shook only slightly as she lifted the second crate's lid. A single 8x10 photograph lay atop yellowed newspaper clippings. The photo was old, grainy, but the image was unmistakable. 9 teenage girls, blindfolded, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of what looked like a linoleum wall. They were dressed identically, white t-shirts, bare feet. Their hands hung limp. Their faces, beneath the blindfolds, seemed slack with sedation or terror. Mallory's breath caught when she spotted Jenny, third from the left. But it was the girl beside her that drew her gaze. She was holding up 3 fingers. A message, or a countdown, or a cry no one had heard until now. Mallory swallowed hard. This wasn't madness. It was a system, a signature, a map, and someone wanted it found. The cabin stood on the edge of a deforested ridge, its roof sagging under a moss-choked slope, flanked by dying pines like sentinels that had long stopped caring. Mallory parked her car at the foot of the gravel path, boots crunching over frost-bitten earth as she approached the doorway. The sun was low, slicing the tree line in fractured shafts, but the windows were already dark. No curtains, no blinds, just black panes of warped glass reflecting her back at herself. He opened the door before she knocked. Arthur Bishop looked older than his age, as if time had used him more brutally than most. His beard was unkempt, streaked with paint and ash. His fingers were stained violet, the kind of residue that didn't wash out with water. He wore a painter's apron over wool thermals, barefoot despite the cold. His voice was level, polite. "I figured you'd come," he said. "They usually do, but not for the right reasons." Mallory followed him inside. The interior was a museum of ritual and rot. Every wall was draped in canvas, blank or half-stained with erratic, violent strokes. Twine lattices hung from the rafters like webs. In the center of the room, a butcher's table displayed an open wooden box. Inside it, 9 Polaroids were carefully arranged in a semicircle. The girls. The same image from the storage unit, only now each photo was subtly altered, stretched, faded, outlines painted in red ink like forensic highlights. She noticed one had her cousin's name scratched faintly into the back. Jennifer M. He poured tea from a dented tin kettle. No cups, just 2 mason jars. When she didn't take hers, he shrugged and sipped his. "You think I killed them?" he said after a silence. "That's expected. But I didn't. I don't touch the body. I frame the silence left behind." Mallory stared at him, unmoved. "You had their shoes." "They were mailed to me," he said without hesitation. "No note, no sender, just a box, wrapped like a gift. What would you have done? Turned them over to the police? Let them disappear into an evidence room, never to be seen again?" He smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "I gave them immortality." Mallory stepped closer to the photographs. "You kept this one. You didn't display it." He nodded slowly, reverently. "Because it wasn't for the world." Her voice dropped to a razor whisper. "Then who was it for?" Arthur Bishop said nothing, but his hand, still holding the jar, trembled. The photo became more than evidence. It became a time capsule, one last echo from a sealed room. Forensics ran the print through spectral analysis and chemical breakdowns. The film type, Kodachrome X, had been discontinued in 2002. It shouldn't have even been available when the girls vanished. But the stock used wasn't just old. It was embossed. Ferris & Sons Photography, 1995. Mallory's pulse spiked when she saw the name. Ferris had photographed nearly every Lincoln High yearbook since the late 80s. He was a community fixture, unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of man who always knew how to stay just out of focus. But it wasn't old man Ferris that caught her attention. It was his son, Raymond Ferris, arrested in 2006 for illegal surveillance, hidden cameras discovered in the faculty restroom at a middle school outside Peoria. The case collapsed when the digital evidence was ruled inadmissible due to an improperly filed search warrant. The school quietly settled. Raymond vanished from public record within months. Mallory dug deeper. Raymond Ferris never returned to photography. But employment records, piecemeal, fragmented through subcontractor paperwork and third-party custodial firms, placed him in a half-dozen schools between 2001 and 2004, all in the Midwest, all within driving distance of DeKalb. He was hired as a janitor, always temporary, always off the books. His background never raised flags. He was forgettable by design. Then came the pattern. Each time Ferris appeared, a girl went missing. Not the same week, sometimes not even the same month, but always within the window of his employment. One in Iowa, one in northern Indiana, 3 in Illinois. The connection had never been made before. Local departments didn't cross-reference temp hires for unsolved abductions, especially not in an era before central databases became efficient. But Mallory saw the seam. Ferris moved like a ghost through hallways. He knew the layouts, the camera blind spots, the exits, the schedules. He had the patience of a spider and the gaze of a lens. Mallory pulled DMV records, ran alias checks, and found him living under the name Leonard Doyle in a rental trailer parked behind a broken-down gas station outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The lease was clean. No priors under the new name. No internet, no cell plan, just paper mail and cash orders. She stared at the address. The house of the photographer wasn't just still standing, it was watching. The road narrowed as Mallory left the town limits behind. Pavement turned to gravel, then dirt, lined with skeletal trees and the decaying remains of forgotten fences. GPS lost signal 5 miles out. She didn't need it anymore. The house rose like a blemish on the land, half swallowed by brush, its shingles curled like scorched paper, its windows dark, empty sockets. The mailbox read, Doyle, the letters stenciled in a hand that seemed to shake. She parked far enough back to keep the engine hidden and approached slowly, weapon holstered but hand near. The property was silent but watched. Ringing the perimeter, 6 industrial floodlights blinked against motion, cheap, solar-powered, aimed not to illuminate the yard but to blind anyone who approached it. Inside, the house smelled of dry rot and bleach. The floors creaked under her boots, their groans echoing up to exposed rafters. Trash bags were stacked neatly against the walls, labels in blocky Sharpie, kitchen glass, bathroom textiles, dresser drawers, organized, purged, sanitized. In the back hallway, a door hidden behind a bookshelf opened to a stairwell descending into pitch. The basement reeked of damp concrete and chemical antiseptic. Mallory flicked on her flashlight. 9 doors, each the same, narrow, steel-reinforced, outfitted with industrial deadbolts. Ventilation grills welded shut. Inside, nothing. No bedding, no furniture, just concrete. The walls were foam-insulated and painted hospital white. The silence was unbearable, even long after the screaming had stopped. She pried up a warped floor panel in the 3rd room, where the cement had been patched. Forensics later confirmed what her gut already knew. Blood embedded in the crack, so old it had calcified into the porous surface. Hair, 3 strands, blonde, brown, auburn, Jenny, and 2 others. In the garage, she found the remains of a darkroom, caked in dust but perfectly preserved. An ancient photo enlarger stood like a shrine, surrounded by trays of expired developer fluid and curling negatives. A cracked workbench displayed a stack of contact sheets, enlarged eyes, blurred mouths, hands reaching but never grasping. One photo was pinned to the corkboard above the sink, the same image Mallory had found in the storage unit. 9 girls, blindfolded, anonymous. But here, in the margins, handwritten in neat cursive, "We become eternal the moment we are unseen." He had developed it himself, not to remember them, but to immortalize himself. This wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum, designed for silence, built for ritual, draped in denial. Mallory stared at the photo. He called it art. She called it a confession. The trial began under heavy security and heavier silence. Cedar County Courthouse hadn't seen media like this in decades. Cameras craned like vultures outside the stone facade, satellite trucks jamming every curb. Inside, the air was colder than the season warranted. Every creak of the bench, every shuffled footstep echoed like a judgment. Leonard Doyle, formerly Raymond Ferris, was led into the courtroom in a beige jumpsuit, wrists shackled, jaw slack. He did not scan the gallery. He did not blink when the charges were read aloud. 9 counts of first-degree murder, 9 counts of kidnapping, 9 counts of unlawful confinement. The judge's voice faltered only once when reading Jenny Marr's name. Mallory sat behind the prosecution table, not as an officer, but as family. Her badge had been left in her glove box. Today, she wasn't Detective Kent. Today, she was the voice of the girls who had none left. The prosecution moved methodically. Forensics, DNA, chain of custody, digital reconstructions of the basement's layout, photographs blown up until the jury visibly recoiled. Every angle of Doyle's method, his concealment, his rituals, his manipulation of temporary employment, was presented like clockwork. Cold, clinical, complete. When Doyle finally took the stand, he surprised everyone by waiving his right to remain silent. His voice was steady, calm, as though he were giving a lecture, not facing the rest of his life in a cell. "They were invisible before I ever touched them," he said. "Their parents were too tired, their teachers too distracted, the world too busy. I didn't take them from the light. I found them in the dark." He paused, scanning the room at last. "I was the only one watching." The courtroom exhaled in stunned silence. The outrage that followed was volcanic. Public forums burned with rage. Candlelight vigils erupted nationwide. But the backlash had more than one target. Arthur Bishop, whose exhibition had triggered the investigation, found himself at the center of a different storm. He claimed he had merely exposed a buried truth, given grief a form. But the court of public opinion didn't care for nuance. His gallery in Soho was spray-painted sicko in red. Museums dropped his name from brochures. Collectors withdrew. Lawsuits circled like sharks, none of them sticking, but the damage clung like soot. He wasn't charged, but he was damned. When the gavel finally came down, sentencing Doyle to life without parole, there were no cheers. Just a silence so heavy it seemed to bend the air. Mallory didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just nodded once. Because justice had spoken. But justice was never enough. The memorial sat at the edge of a lake that hadn't seen headlines, courtrooms, or flashbulbs. The water was still, almost glass, catching the soft burn of sunset like a held breath. Pines lined the shoreline in hushed formation, their shadows stretching long across the earth. There was no ribbon cutting, no press release, no speeches. Just 9 stone footprints, staggered in a slow arc from the trail to the water's edge. Each footprint was hand-carved, life-sized, and unique. Some small, some wide, one with a slight arch etched more deeply than the others, as if catching a limp. Beneath each print, a name. Nothing else. No dates, no last names, no mention of what had been taken. Only what was left behind. Mallory Kent stood alone on the gravel path, her boots dusted with pine needles, her fingers curled around a silver necklace. Jenny's. A cheap pendant in the shape of a music note, faded and worn, recovered from a drawer in Doyle's garage, buried under a stack of appointment cards and old receipts. The clasp was broken. She hadn't fixed it. She stepped forward, her breath fogging in the late October air, and stopped at the 7th stone print. Jenny. The name was shallowly carved, as if meant to weather slowly. As if memory, too, should fade with grace. Mallory crouched, brushing a leaf from the engraving, then slipped the necklace into the small depression of the heel. It fit perfectly, as if the stone had always waited for it. Behind her, footsteps approached, soft, respectful. A woman whose daughter had been the first to vanish. A teacher who once wrote Eliza Crawford a college recommendation. A janitor who remembered lending Jenny a quarter for the vending machine 2 weeks before she disappeared. None of them spoke. They simply stood, shoulder to shoulder, strangers bound by the same wound. Later that month, a crate arrived at a law office in downtown DeKalb. Inside was the final piece of Footsteps of the Forgotten, the original spiral of lacquered shoes. The anonymous buyer had returned it without fanfare, along with a note in block letters. This belonged to them, not to me. The families voted unanimously to dismantle it. In its place, a new installation was raised in the town's library garden, 9 smooth stones in a circle, untouched, unpainted. At the center, a plaque read, "We remember no names, no stories, just the act of refusal, to forget, to sensationalize, to let silence rot into spectacle." Mallory visited that circle once a week, not as penance, but as promise.